Fog lay low across the flats like spilled milk, the highway a black thread sewing between pale sage and dark timber, the world reduced to 2 cones of headlight and the soft growl of a family SUV. In the driver's seat, Adrian Morales kept 10 and 2 in a quiet mantra, easy easy, eyes searching the gray for curves and the small surprises of mountain mornings. Beside him, Lena dozed with her cheek on the window and a blanket pulled to her chin. In back their 8-year-old Milo hugged a stuffed fox and watched the blur of fence posts like a procession of sleepy metronomes. They were an hour into a 3-hour drive to Grand Junction for a checkup Lena had promised her sister she wouldn't skip this time, a promise stitched to weather and willpower. Adrian loved this hour when the world gave you road and engine and the soft thump of tires ironing the centerline seams. The cabin smelled of coffee and wet wool and the oranges they'd peeled at a gas station in Delta. Fog-damped sound turned the engine's murmur into a velvet ribbon. The road's gentle rise became a shallow saddle between hills, and a brown sign for a trailhead slipped past like a remembered dream. Adrian thumbed the defroster higher, clearing a breathy crescent on the glass, and Lena stirred, smiling without fully waking, murmuring something about the canyon's light when the sun finally crested. "We'll beat it," he said half to her, half to the pale clock on the dash. A distant train horn climbed the cold air from the valley, a hawk's silhouette hung motionless in the gray like a cutout. Adrian eased off the throttle where the shoulder narrowed and frost still feathered in the ditch. "How you doing, bud?" he asked, and Milo wiggled the fox's paw in answer, eyes wide, content to be carried by a machine and a father who felt in this hour like the safest thing in the world. The lane opened to a straightaway framed by aspen like a pale picket, their leaves long gone, trunks banded with scars. Fog thickened in the low places, thinned in the rises. The world breathed. Adrian sipped coffee, set it down with care, and felt the tiny tug of the wheel as the crown shed water toward a shallow culvert. Little notes from the road came up through the column, aggregate, patch, a seam, each a syllable in a language he knew. Somewhere in the timber to the right, something large moved with a careful insistence, and the fog carried the small sounds forward too fast. Hoof on gravel, breath in cold air, a twig's single complaint. The sign for Deer Shing, with its leaping silhouette appeared and vanished, a prophecy nobody wants cashed at face value. Adrian checked speed, checked mirrors, rolled his shoulders to keep them loose. They crested and dropped into a shallow swale the locals called the Bowl, a place where fog gathered and stayed like a kept secret. The asphalt went glossy and black. The shoulder sank away to Willow and Narrow Creek. The guardrail began, dented from stories told in other weathers. The engine note softened as he feathered off power, giving the tires time to tell the truth. Lena blinked awake on the edge of a dream, saw the white vapor curl across the lane, and reached for Adrian's forearm without thinking. "You good?" she asked, a question and a blessing. "I've got it," he said, not as bravado as craft. The world leaned into the next small bend and the bend leaned back. Then the fog parted like a theater curtain pulled by a shaky hand, and there, mid-lane, startled, beautiful, wrong, stood a mule deer doe with 2 yearlings behind, eyes wide saucers of reflected dawn. The doe turned first, a liquid pivot toward the shoulder that wasn't there, hooves skittering on wet paint. The yearlings froze in that ancient calculation, flight or statue, both risky. Adrian had already lifted, already straightened, already told every muscle in his forearms that panic was a luxury for later. The ABS would hum if he stabbed. The ditch would roll them if he bailed. The guardrail waited like a bad compromise. He aimed for the pocket between animals, the smallest moving absence. Split the difference the way whitewater kayakers slip between rocks when the river is honest about being stronger. The tires hissed over a thin film of melt that might as well have been oil. The rear whispered light, then returned. The wheel spoke a quick sentence in the language of traction that he answered with counter and breath. Lena's hand closed on the grab handle, knuckles white, voice calm even in fear. "With you," she said, and it steadied him in a place beneath thought. Milo made a small sound, a swallowed sound, clutching the fox to his chest, eyes on the back of Adrian's head as if the shape of a father could bend physics. The doe committed and cleared. 1 yearling hopped after with the clumsy grace of adolescence. The second did the wrong math, turned into the lane and sprinted parallel, confused. Adrian bled speed without stab, lined the nose into safe asphalt, and then the deer cut across him, a last-second panic that made their trajectories briefly argue about sharing space. He chose the shoulder to miss it, half a tire's width, the smallest cheat, and the right wheels found the soft where the county's last blade had carved too deep. The SUV dropped an inch, then two, the crown tugged, the steering went prize-fighting light. He corrected, gentle, hands supple, and for a second the world agreed to forgive the trespass. Then the fog hit a washboard ripple, the soft bit deeper than expected, the shoulder's edge undercut by melt and time. The right rear dipped, the left front tipped, and the whole chassis took a breath before deciding which side of gravity it would prefer. "Hold," he said to metal to luck to the small watching boy. The SUV shouldered back onto asphalt with a thump, the tail stepping like a spooked horse, and the guardrail, unhelpfully close now, ran a cold silver line at their periphery. The deer were gone, wind and fog and poor choices dispersing them back into brush. The family remained, momentum arguing with mass. The tires chattered, found, lost, found. The lane narrowed to a question only angles could answer. A single water-filled pothole on the inside line offered its mean little coin toss, and the right front took it, splashed, and lightened just enough to let the next decision go the wrong way. The SUV yawed, slow at first, an ungainly pirouette in syrup, then momentum bit through fog and made the world hurry. Adrian countered and the rear swung wider. The left tires climbed the crown and then the center line, and the body rolled with the inevitability of a page turning. "Down," he said, deep voice, ancient command, and Lena folded over Milo with a speed that belonged to other mammals and older fires. Metal met asphalt in a skittering scrape, roof rack kissing the lane with a bright, brief spark that the fog immediately swallowed. The right side lifted, hesitated, then lost the argument. Glass webbed and held, deployable things deployed with coughs and bursting flowers. Weight shifted like a room full of furniture marching to one wall at once. They went over, one long, low roll, less tumble than heave, then another half, and came to rest nose down on the soft shoulder, driver's side slightly up, passenger side pinned, windshield starred but present, airbags sighing their last warm breaths into the cold. Inside the catoned quiet, there was the wet tick of cooling, the faraway rush of a creek, the small computer brain of the SUV deciding to flash hazard lights because that's what it could do. Adrian tasted copper, checked teeth with tongue, blinked to reset the horizon. A ribbon of dust and talc hung in the cabin like morning incense. "Milo?" he said low, even counting syllables like beads. "Here," Milo answered, thin, brave, the fox crushed but still smiling. "Lena?" "I'm here," she said, already moving, already inventorying sensation, already running the invisible triage she'd learned from other bad minutes and good training. Seatbelts had done their part cruelly and well, shoulders ached, a wrist sang a bright complaint, knees had been introduced to things they'd prefer not to. Blood was a rumor at the scalp, more sticky than dramatic, a color mostly stolen by the fog. The world had rotated without asking. Their bodies were undefeated but unimpressed. Adrian looked at his door, jammed by ditch and geometry, and at the rear, clearer but high. "Stay for a count," he said, voiced the metronome again, and everyone obeyed because it was easier to borrow rhythm than find it. He tasted the grit of airbag powder and heard the patient click of the hazards insisting into the gray. Outside, the fog carried the sound of something far away, a pack of engines, high and soft, hungry bees under quilts. It made no sense here in this bowl at this hour. It made perfect sense in the part of the world where people who love roads often find each other by accident. Adrian tried the horn, no voice left in it, and settled for the old language of blinking. A triangle of reflection through a bent mirror flashed like a lighthouse at a ship that might not exist. He had done what he could. The road, if it was kind, would do the rest. The first motorcycle ghosted through the fog like a black fin, then another and another, until the bowl filled with the swarm song of a convoy easing down to a cautious idle. Leather and textile, high-vis and matte black, headlamps diffused into halos, helmets turned as one when hazard lights pulsed from the ditch. The lead rider lifted a hand and the whole procession flowed to the shoulder with the practiced grace of a flock. They killed engines and the world rang with the little silence that follows decisions. Kickstands stabbed asphalt. Visors flipped. Out stepped a diversity of mornings, older, younger, patched and brandless, people bound by a road that had just told them to stop. Gabe Ruiz, the lead in a yellowed high-vis vest with reflective chevrons, jogged toward the blink with a compact trauma kit knocked soft with use. "3 inside," Adrian called, voice level from a place beneath panic. "Conscious." "We got you," Gabe answered, 2 words that changed the air. Riders fanned out without being told, traffic control up lane and down, A woman in a white modular helmet laying out flares like small suns, a tall rider in a plaid overshirt dragging neon triangles from a pannier. Someone in a purple rain shell, Nora, popped a trunk on a GS and produced an orange toe strap, wedges, a fistful of shop towels. Another, DV paramedic on days off, still carrying his skill like a pocket knife, slid into the ditch, boots finding purchase on wet grass, hands already assessing doors, pillars, the way the SUV sat against the soft. Gabe knelt by the rear hatch, headlamp snapping on, voice a metronome of calm. Names? Adrian. Lena. Milo. Copy that. We're going to stabilize first, then open a path. Everyone breathing okay? Any pins and needles you can't explain? Answers came, measured. Hands on metal translated language into shelter. Traffic, what little there was, saw high-vis and flares and did what humans will still do when you ask properly. They slowed, then stopped, then waited, the fog turning brake lights into rubies on a string. A blue pickup driver volunteered a Sherpa blanket and a smile. A rancher in a battered hat said he'd turn at the next pullout and block the far curve if that would make the line safer. It would. He did. The convoy leader pointed with 2 fingers, never shouting, the choreography of competence unfurling like a quiet flag. Ropes ran from a crash bar to a stout pinion. Ratchet straps found anchor on frame points that had earned their keep. Wedges bit mud to deny movement its last cheap trick. The SUV hummed a little less in the bones. Dev's gloved knuckles tapped glass near Adrian's shoulder. We're here, he said, eyes level, tone tuned for 8-year-olds and men pretending not to be scared. We're going to open your world a bit. Somewhere inside the fog, the day took a step closer. Nora slid a moving blanket across the sill to turn sharp edges into kindness. Gabe braced the hatch with his thigh and found the emergency latch with fingers that had learned the map of too many makes. The door argued, then relented. Wet air rushed in with its tonic of sage and rain and the iron smudge of disturbed earth. Hey Milo, Dev said, first name first, kneeling so his eyes met a smaller pair. Big breaths, little buddy. That fox looks brave. Milo nodded because the fox did. Lena squeezed her son's shoulder and kept her own breath slow on purpose, lending rhythm like a battery pack. The riders moved like a well-rehearsed band in a room too small for the music. A woman with a patch that read Red Rock Riveters produced trauma shears and a gentle smile, trimming a belt tail without insulting the buckle. A big man with a tiny ADV sticker on his helmet rolled out a compact jack and took an inch of sag out of the passenger side so the doorframe would give another half. Adrian did the one thing the situation wanted of him more than courage. He held still. The steering column creaked a little as weight redistributed. The hazard clicked and clicked, stubborn heartbeat. He wanted to help and help by not helping, a discipline learned in hard ways by good people. Seatbelt stay until I'm inside. Dev told them, the rule delivered as assurance rather than command. He slid into the back like a letter under a door, shoulders angled, chin tucked, hands soft. Eyes on me, Lena, he said, checking pupils, neckline, the small truths of posture that tell bigger truths. The column of fog above the ditch glowed as the sun tried on the idea of appearing. Breath smoked from mouths, gloves shined with dew. Someone's Bluetooth speaker, God bless instinct, whispered a metronome click just loud enough for hands to sink. It made ridiculous sense. It worked. Okay, Nora called from outside, voice even. We're going to take load off the B-pillar. On my count you'll hear a pop. Don't love it, don't fear it. Straps tightened, wedges bit, metal side. The SUV settled into its new definition of safe. Now, Dev said to Adrian, gentle conductor. I'm with your boy. You come last. It stung and it saved him in the same breath. Copy, Adrian answered, tasting the humility the moment required. A father's job can be staying too. The back seat became a small, blessed hallway. Milo came first, a burrito of blanket and bravery, passed hand to hand through a door that opened wider with the insistence of many. He arrived against a chest wearing a faded patch, Mesa County Moto, and the chest shook once, a tiny sob the owner would deny. Got you, the chest said anyway. They built a corridor of people from ditch to shoulder, a human gutter carrying a child, then blankets, then breath. Milo went to the blue pickup's tailgate where a woman laid out a quilt with the competence of a field nurse and the tenderness of an aunt. Fox too, she said, tucking the stuffed animal under the boy's chin like a passport to a safer country. Lena followed next, guided through geometry by hands that asked permission as they worked. Slow, slow, Dev murmured, eyes checking lines only he could see. Her boot found the blanket over the sill, then the wedge, then the cool asphalt that was suddenly holy. When her weight shifted free of the SUV, the convoy exhaled in a chorus you could feel. Dizzy? Nora asked, palm light against Lena's temple. A little. It'll pass. Sit, love. A mylar blanket crackled around shoulders. Someone's thermos made the rounds, tea and honey, and the ritual of sharing that refutes bad mornings. Fog condensed on helmet shells and dripped like quiet punctuation. With the passengers clear, the lead riders rechecked the web of straps and wedges that kept a good outcome honest. They firmed the jack another tooth. They slid a chalk under tread like a prayer you can stand on. The SUV answered by not answering, which was perfection. Adrian waited with deliberate stillness while they repositioned, hands on wheel, jaw unclenched. He could see the skyline through the cracked windshield, sawtooth dark against the sky trying its first blue. He thought, unhelpfully and beautifully, of the breakfast place in town where pancakes came on plates that were older than anybody's stories. We're set, Dev said finally, back at his shoulder. You and me easy as tying boots. They rehearsed the move with words before they did it with bodies. The angle of shoulder, the way to pivot knee, the breath to take before the belts click. It was choreography taught in 30 seconds and paid for with 30 years of somebody else's practice. When he came free, when his boots met dirt, when the world arranged itself into a horizon that behaved, Adrian did not wobble or weep or shout. He put a hand on the SUV's cold flank the way you touch an animal that has done a hard thing with you, and he said, "Thank you," to steel, to straps, to strangers. Above them, a sliver of sun finally found the bowl and turned every droplet into sequins. It was gaudy and perfect. Helmets glowed like planets. The fog fled in ribbons, found gullies, lost nerve. The road became a place again rather than a problem. Gabe radioed 911 with the kind of report that makes dispatchers lean back and smile. Occupants extricated, breathing, stable, vehicle secured, scene controlled by civilians awaiting EMS, traffic diverted. The answer came warm even through static. Copy, units en route, thank you for the save. A long breath moved through the convoy, passed from rider to rider like a flask. You could see shoulders lower. You could see hands shake once now that the shaking wouldn't cost anyone anything. You could hear someone laugh at nothing because the body craves the sound of its own relief. The sirens reached them as a suggestion before they became a promise. Doppler through thinning fog, the county's red and whites threading the basin with purpose. The bikers stayed on task rather than looking up. Professionalism's last test is what you do when help is visible. They finished what they started. Cones set, triangles squared, straps checked thrice. Adrian stood between Lena and Milo under a blanket that smelled like saddle soap and morning. He counted their breaths like coins and found them enough. Lena's fingers found his, bruised, cold, eloquent. They didn't speak because some gratitude is too large for sentences and too fragile for jokes. EMS arrived with the quiet bustle of people who live in the space between bad and worse. They took vitals that confirmed the convoy's unofficial medicine. Numbers in friendly ranges, pupils even, spines lucky. Adhesive electrodes refused to stick to fog-damp skin. Someone produced a towel from a pannier with the ceremony of a magician and fixed the problem. A deputy rolled up and took in the unlikely congregation. Leather, neon, family, fog. He touched 2 fingers to his brim and said the only thing that made sense. Y'all did good. Gabe shrugged in that national dialect of don't make a thing of it and pointed at Nora and Dev and the whole human machine. The deputy took names he could not possibly remember and promised to write them anyway. A tow rig idled up, and the operator, a woman with forearms like braided cable and a smile like sunshine through grills, talked to the SUV as if it were a skittish horse, told it about ramps and angles, got it to agree to be lifted without complaint. The straps unspooled, the bed tilted, physics obeyed an ethic older than roads. In the pause before departure, Milo tugged at Adrian's sleeve. Are they superheroes? He whispered, eyes huge. Adrian considered, weighed accuracy against the necessity of myth, and chose both. They're riders, he said, and sometimes riders are what the road sends. Lena's shoulder ached like a bell rung too hard. She imagined the MRI she'd kept delaying, the relief of a diagnosis with a plan. She imagined text messages to her sister and a story that begged to be undertold. She imagined pancakes shamelessly with butter that knew its job. Fog lifted enough to reveal the line of bikes like a ribcage along the shoulder, engine still cool, chain lube shining on rear sprockets, tiny flags on antennas that fluttered now that air finally moved. It looked like a cavalry that had swapped horses for torque and weatherproof zippers. As EMS loaded the family for a cautious ride into town, observations, warm blankets, dignity intact, the convoy mounted up one by one, engines catching like agreed-upon chords. They didn't rev for drama. They rolled for departure. The bowl, now bright, recorded their leaving in a shimmer of heat and a smell of rain on hot metal. The ER in town greeted them with fluorescent competence and a heated blanket that made Lena's eyes close in a way that was not sleep but something adjacent. X-rays promised soreness without stories. Milo's wrist earned a cartoon brace and a sticker. Adrian's knuckles met iodine and tape and the nurse's dry humor about Fog choosing favorites. A social worker with crow's feet and motorcycle earrings appeared beside the curtain as if conjured. "I heard some of my people were useful," she said, and Adrian laughed for the first time all day, a short, surprised bark that startled him with its own brightness. They traded names like currency, bought themselves a minute of normal with it. The deputy stopped by with a clipboard and a kindness that didn't feel like a formality. He recited descriptions of riders the way you recite stars you saw once and hope to find again. Gabe high-vis vest. Nora purple shell. Big guy with little ADV sticker. Paramedic named Dev. He shook his head as if to clear the edges. Folks. Adrian asked to keep the tow receipt, the one with greased thumbprints and the operator's tiny doodle of a fox. "For him," he said, nodding to Milo asleep with the real fox under his chin and an orange popsicle stain like a medal at his mouth's corner. The operator's card lived beside it. Jess. Taylor Tow with a smiley face that felt like a signature. By afternoon, the fog burned off the highway and left behind damp patches drying into lace. A road crew placed a new deer crossing sign 9 feet earlier than the last one as if inches could persuade hooves. The bowl kept its secret and gave up its story depending on who asked and how. The convoy's group chat bloomed with quiet photos nobody would post publicly, gloved thumbs up, a close-up of a wedge, sunrise breaking the gray into pieces you could pocket. Someone typed, "Good ride," and someone else typed, "Good stop," and both were true. At home that evening, Adrian set 3 plates for pancakes and overpoured syrup like penance and grace. Lena propped her sore foot on a second chair and narrated the parking lot sunset as if announcing colors could make them real. Milo put the fox at the head of the table and assigned it a maple-scented rank in the household. They didn't talk about heroes, they talked about riders with names and tools and the discipline to stop. They talked about deer and decisions and the way fog makes sound lie. They talked about luck briefly and then replaced it with gratitude because it holds up better in the wash. When the house went quiet and the heater clicked like kindling, Adrian stood in the doorway of Milo's room and watched his son breathe. He had nothing profound to add to the dark beyond the old words. "Thank you," he said to a room that had earned them. A week later, a postcard arrived at Taylor Tow addressed in slow block letters. "To the riders on 50 near Whitewater, thank you for stopping." The shop pinned it to a corkboard between a torque chart and a flyer for a charity ride. Customers read it while waiting for rotations and nodded as if to music only they could hear. The county added rumble strips before the bowl and trimmed willow where it nibbled at sight lines. A ranger put up a laminated placard at the trailhead kiosk about mule deer habits at dawn and dusk, words humble in the face of hooves but better than none. Someone scrawled beneath in pencil, "Slow is holy." On a Saturday, the convoy met at a diner with a parking lot big enough for bad choices and second chances. Helmets lined the counter like glossy eggs. The waitress poured coffee as if fueling weather systems. They didn't toast themselves. They argued tires and told lies about mileage and passed a phone with a picture of a fox and a signed thank you from a kid who looked an inch taller than last week. Lena sent a box of bakery cookies to the firehouse that hadn't needed to come, with a note that said, "For the days you do." She texted "all clear" to her sister with a selfie of a brace and a grin. She circled a date on a calendar no one else would see and wrote MRI in small, brave letters. Adrian drove the repaired SUV back through the bowl at legal speed with his blinker on embarrassingly early, because some lessons write themselves into muscle and stay. He slowed for the sign as if it were a person he knew. He did not look for deer. He looked for the habit of looking. Milo practiced tying ratchet straps in the garage using a broom handle and the patience of 8. He instructed the fox in traffic control protocols with the solemnity of a junior marshal. He told anyone who would listen that motorcycles are loud on purpose so the road can hear you coming and decide to behave. When fog returned, as it does, the bowl remembered the morning it was a church for a few minutes. a place where people who share hobby and hazard became clergy to one small family and preached the gospel of stopping. The road kept its scars and smoothed them like skin, like time. If this were your road, your county, Mesa, Delta, Montrose, who should read this and fix the next blind bowl before it asks for another story? Drop the name, and rate the rescue 0 to 10 so somebody looking at a budget line decides to fund rumble strips and better signs where dawn fog lies in wait.